everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Reframe series. And today we are going to actually interview Manu. And it's been a couple of episodes, and I feel like you all started just watching us without actually getting to meet the people behind the podcast or Rethink Desi. So I'm glad we're finally having the opportunity to. Before we get started, please like, comment, and subscribe on this video so we can continue to make more content for you. And let's get started. So I first met Manu while we were both taking classes at Los Angeles City College together in the middle of the pandemic. And she actually ended up sharing her film project in my class, which she wasn't assigned to, but it happened sporadically. And after seeing her work, we connected and we realized that we had a shared vision for voicing the South Asian struggle in the US from our own individual perspectives. And since then, we've been collaborating and with each other in different ways for Rethink Desi. I'm going to share a little bit about Manu with you so that you can get to know her. So Manu is a doctoral candidate in Anthropology and Social Change at the California Institute for Integral Studies. She is focusing on how youth formulate their sexual scripts in Punjab, India, namely, and how are they defining romance, love, intimacy, and how do phenomenon like globalization influence their decision-making? She's also a teaching and research assistant at her graduate school and holds a master's in global health. She is currently working on her documentary film that she shot in Punjab related to her research. And she is curious about how the Punjabi diasporic community comes together and wants to capture this through her photography and filmmaking. Her previous experiences span the private and public sector on issues such as homelessness and housing, abortion access, being a full-spectrum doula, and trauma-informed yoga instructor. She currently is the mother of a 10-year-old pup named Poca and is happily. So very nice to have you with us, Manu. Thank you for joining us today. So I want to start off by asking you, what inspired you to pursue your PhD in Anthropology and Social Change in such a unique topic? And also while doing it and taking filmmaking classes as well. So yes, excited to hear.
Thanks, Arpita. It's so bizarre to hear your own bio and stuff and just on standby, just saying. But yeah, it's also an interesting moment when you kind of hear those words of what your trajectory of your life was and what brought you here, right? It makes you sort of sit back and kind of reflect. And honestly, I knew I wanted to pursue higher education. I just didn't know where. And I have a little bit of an interesting background. I was pre-med in college. I was I'm going to become a doctor. That's what I want to do. That was always my mantra. I was that person that did anything to get volunteer experience or whatever to go into medical school. And so I ended up, majoring in pre-med and had a biochemistry background in my undergrad and volunteered at hospitals and everything. So I was very well versed in the healthcare system and ended up then, pursuing medical school, actually. And I went for a semester and I did horribly. And I was in a Caribbean school that is really stressful and their program was just not at the right pace that I could match. People are successful doctors from these programs and kudos to them, but it was just something that just didn't fit with me. And at the time, I also was struggling with my own personal things, which then brings me to sort of the topic that I'm kind of exploring in my PhD. So it kind of was falling into something that I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting to go for a PhD. I just knew I wanted to achieve that level as a typical Desi girl who thinks that, that's the only way to get sort of respect in my community, this odd sort of subconscious thing that we're kind of brought up with. But yeah, so all of these layers of things kind of led me to then coming back, getting my master's in global health. And then I was oh, I definitely have this visibility and understanding of the healthcare system and stuff. And so I started working for the city and county of San Francisco and they had a relationship with CIS. And so I was like, oh, what kind of programs does CIS have? And, I can sort of like flex my schedule or get tuition support and stuff. And I was totally hooked on this anthropology and social change program because I really liked what they were about. The social change part is really what really like resonated with me, because that's kind of how I picked my schools and my education in the past. Anyways, I wanted to be part of institutions that were really focusing on that. That's why I went to the University of San Francisco. That's why I went to Truro University. Like, it's all about bringing sort of the marginalization up at the fore and like really looking at what's really causing that marginalization and how can you like support that as an activist scholar. So that is definitely the center of what CIS is that you are trying to intersect practicality and theoretical. And anthropology was just kind of the way I was always thinking. I just didn't know how to name it. And that's how I kind of fell into the discipline. In the beginning, I didn't have any anthropology background. It was like somewhat of a struggle to kind of like reassure the program too that I'm like enough to be an anthropologist, because I sort of frame my questions that way, right? Which are sort of around like, who holds the power? Why are we making these decisions? Where does this tradition come from? Who said that this custom needs to continue? What does this actually mean if it does continue? So I always had sort of that lens growing up in the Punjabi community. And so I was like, I didn't know that's what this was. And so I kind of fell into that. And then as I got more and more deeper into anthropology and social change, I knew that there was a creative side of me that I kind of suppressed. And I was like, okay, well, I'm in LA now, so home of Hollywood, like there must be opportunities. And so I started exploring like city colleges and stuff like that because they were cheaper. And I was, after being through the educational system and incurring so much student debt, I was like, well, I'm definitely not going to go to film school, and what can I do to kind of like upskill myself? And so I started taking photography classes, cinematography classes, visual culture, theoretical sort of like classes, and sort of thinking about how we frame things, not just in anthropology and academia on paper, but what does it mean on screen? So when you see a photograph, when you see a film, what sort of social impact does that have? And how can I kind of relate those two? So I knew that was kind of the way where I can then, be an activist also in sort of this work, and then also kind of visualize this material in a way that could reach more people because we're in a global digital world, and also make it more public, right? Because anthropology seems like a discipline that really hasn't kind of made its strides in the public sort of sphere. So I really wanted to take this discipline and make it useful for everybody, which is also how we ended up in this podcast, right? And so we knew that you and I were sort of like holding these concepts and these experiences in the same place, but we also wanted to talk about them and be like, probably also thinking the same thing, but how do we resolve personally these issues? How do we create solidarity with these issues? How do we kind of become a stronger community and a resilient community? And that is the flip side of doing anthropological work. It's feminist. It's very much centered on bringing people up with you. And so, all of this kind of world kind of just melds together in that way, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much to unpack in all of the things that you've shared. I would love to know, what are some of the challenges that you've faced along in this journey, and what are how have you learned to overcome them?
That's a really good question, because I was one of the first to get into the college system, try to figure out how to apply to colleges, universities, take the SATs. I remember being like, I don't even know what the SATs are, why is this important? What does this even mean? I didn't understand the weight of that test. And I think it also didn't make any sense why that test was weighted so heavily, right? In terms of how it directly determines what institution you get admission to, right? That it's a metric. And at the end of the day, you're kind of reduced to this metric. Sure, our systems need some revising and all of that. But, you know, a lot of schools are getting rid of the SAT too as a requirement. But anyways, it was just sort of like a struggle in a way to understand the educational system from a standpoint that's actually like, oh, I'm pursuing even more and more education, but I don't know how to get there. And then I also think not having the right mentors around me was sort of a challenge because we're like first generation college going. There weren't people in my closer circles or in my parents' circles that I could just be like, oh, so how did you do this? You know, how did you apply? When did you apply? You know, what sort of things do you think I definitely need to do as extracurricular? What are like some AP classes that I don't really need to take? Why do I need to take them all? You know, like all of these conversations weren't happening. And like by 18, it was like, you need to have like exactly what discipline you want to major in and where you want to go. And that is not the truth, you know? So it really ended up becoming like this rigid way of kind of like figuring out the system while also being in the system. And I think that was like a really big struggle for me because I didn't have mentors and I didn't have someone who was holding my hand through the process because I was the first one to do it. And then I think now what the challenge is I've gone through Western academia, but Western academia is not the answer in a way of how to like really understand this world, you know, that we're living in. There are other ways of knowing, other ways of being that are equally valuable in knowledge production. And those sorts of things need to be drawn into these classrooms that kind of teach you that other methods and strategies and sources can be equally valid in you making sure that you understand the world, you know? So there are different ways of knowing this world. And so I think like that also is kind of a hard challenge to face because I'm now trying to navigate the world of academia as I'm trying to become a professor. And so I have to be in a standardized form. I need to make sure I meet those metrics again, you know, and so like it kind of like wobbles trying to figure out that balance. And I think that's sort of the biggest challenge is that how do I become more connected to myself as someone who's going to be entrenched in academia while also not stepping away from my passions and activism and being more grassroots.
I can definitely resonate with a lot of these challenges, which I think a lot of folks, especially like first generation immigrants, can definitely relate to that struggle, especially around like SATs or trying to go to college and not necessarily knowing how to navigate the system, but having to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like with, you know, Biden forgiving, you know, the student debt too. And it's like knowing debt, you know, is like a struggle. You keep on accruing this debt as you get into higher education, assuming that by the time you're out, you're going to have a well-paying enough job to pay off that debt, but that is not happening. And so finance and stuff, and I know that's also something that you're very interested in too, is that, you know, we haven't been able to like tap into certain templates that may have been already existent with people who had wealth and are able to kind of navigate that and build upon that, right? Our folks were trying to build wealth or whatever that looked like for them. And while they were doing that, they were struggling with that. But then we're over here like, let's accrue this debt, where things are just not matching, you know? And so it keeps us also then within a certain bracket, you know, in society, economically and financially. And so, yeah. So just that's also the challenge is sort of understanding where your money is going and how like how to manage your finances, but then also to like be realistic on what your goals are. And, you know, that's a whole overarching like way of life, right? Like a struggle for the rest of your life. But just those sorts of questions were just not things that I were thinking about because I totally thought, get the education, and then that's sort of what's going to be your answer, you know, which is also a very Desi way of thinking. Not that I think it's like bad. It's just, it comes with a lot of complexity that we just didn't know.
Yeah. I'd love to know what kind of process have you developed along the way to help support your work?
I'm a very vocal person, and I think that's like my biggest strength, honestly. I'm not afraid to ask questions. I am not afraid to like talk to random people and build relationships. And I think that definitely has made me like a person who is a go-getter. I'll give you an example. So, I mean, how we met, is also a clear example too, right? That you share that too, is that you reached out to me via Zoom chat and we were just like, oh shit, we're Indians in this thing trying to make movies, and like we want to like bring in all of our skill set and we want to make public our knowledge and stuff like that because it needs to be more relatable and understood by our communities. And we did it, and we're doing it. And I think that sort of goes really far. While I'm getting my doctorate in anthropology and social change, I am focusing on human sexuality. And there is actually a department at CIS for human sexuality. And I ended up finding it on my own because it's such a small school. And I was able to connect with the department chair. And I was like, I really want to take your classes. And now they are a mentor of mine. And I am so grateful. And I think that's also very important. Because if you're not a go-getter, if you, could be introverted and stuff, but if you want to go far, you have to kind of step out of that comfort zone and really like bridge connections and conversations with people. Because connecting with people, especially in filmmaking, connecting with people is really what's going to get you far and get your projects done. You can't be a one-person show. And I think then that led to a different relationship, with my chair and a best friend of theirs. And I had no clue, but then that best friend had worked in Chandigarh and is a Punjab scholar and stuff. And so like the world just kind of like came together, And so I think if you develop this process where you reach out to people that you really admire, don't be afraid to share in their struggle, be supportive of one another, offer support. Sometimes it's like you can give something to somebody who you're, also getting something from. It's like your mentors are always going to need someone to proofread. Your mentors are always going to need someone to hold their things, or hold some space or, something like that. Like there's always something you can give someone if someone is giving to you. And I think, actually, I was just discussing this with Jimmy the other day, my husband, and I was like, I think it's been really hard for me to reach out to people where I feel like I don't have anything to give. And I think that's also like a Desi mentality, right? It's like, there's like in Punjabi, it's like, oh, main kyun nahi puchhanga or whatever, it's like, mere ko kuch hega, like, I don't have anything to give. What makes me feel strong enough that I can actually ask for something, And I think that's a really terrible way to think, actually. And I was like trying to undo this way of thinking, like, where does it come from? Why am I like thinking that way? Because at the end of the day, you won't know what you can give if you don't ask, if you're not in conversation with the person and you're not like trying to like make something out of whatever you're trying to make out of your project or out of something, then you won't know what you can give. And I would disagree that we don't have things to give, and it doesn't always have to be a give and take relationship. People are very nice in this world and very generous in this world too. And I think that's also something that I kind of had to wire myself to believe in as I go through life too, right? Is that process has to be there, that your setbacks are just setbacks, but your highs are highs too, And so you kind of have to like self-sufficiently energize yourself and know where to get your energy from and have that process of tapping into what you need in order to be successful. We were just talking about whether that means exercising, finding sports that you enjoy, taking your walks, and, having a very sweet libation when you want to. But, like things like that.
Yeah. I want to end with this one last question. I think that there are a lot of people who will be inspired by you and would be interested in having some advice or guidance from you in terms of what they could do for their path moving forward. So do you have any tips or guidance that you would have for them?
I mean, I think just put your best foot forward. The world is a scary place, but it's also full with really fun, happy people, and I think trusting yourself that you can do whatever you kind of put your mind to. I know it sounds cliche, but it's real, you know, and don't be afraid to ask questions, you know, build relationships with people that you've never met before, manage your emotional health. I think emotional intelligence, you know, we haven't had the best role models growing up either because, you know, our families have been working 2 jobs and trying to do childcare on their own, and life has been like really complicated for them, and so we really haven't been able to tap into our emotions, I think, as a society as well. So know how you kind of emotionally respond, and how that affects sort of your relationships around romantically or not romantically. And yeah, I think, yeah, don't be afraid to take risks, you know, and do things that you love for yourself. You know, there's no one to prove. It isn't you. At the end of the day, you should go to sleep happy that you're doing something that nourishes you. And I know I'm saying all of this with a certain level of privilege too. Like, I'm definitely full of privilege. I'm, you know, financially comfortable right now. I can explore the things that I want to explore, and I, you know, I'm owning that. So yeah, my advice comes from that place.
Yeah, it's still helpful, and it's good to have this perspective of kind of having the space to pursue what you do desire and what you are passionate about.
Yeah. And I think, you know, like, everyone also, like, I think, assumes that there's a straight path to certain things, right? Because like we take medical school, for example, like, you have to get a bachelor's degree in a science thing and then have a certain GPA, and but like, you really don't need to major in science, you know, but people do. And so like, things like that, it's not always a straight answer or a straight route. And I think that's also beautiful, right? And you fall into things that you weren't even expecting, and your journey teaches you a lot about you, and your journey also then becomes something that's like malleable for what is supposed to happen in the moment, you know? Maybe it's a little like too woo, like, out there, but like, I am definitely a believer that like, the energy really kind of dictates where you're going to go and all that stuff. So whatever you're kind of putting in is going to determine what you're really seeking, and where you're headed. And as I'm getting older, it's getting more and more true for me. So yeah, it might be a little bit bizarre to think about it in terms of energy, but I really think that if you have a certain positivity and you kind of are ready for something, it will come to you, you know, and it might not be in the exact shape or form that you want it, but it will show up in your life in some shape or form.
Nice.
Yeah. Was that a little woo?
No, I think that was great. And I hope our viewers took a lot away from this. Kind of, I think it helps provide a very different perspective on approaching life. And thank you for being with us here today, Manu, and we will close it off. Once again, if you liked this episode, please like, subscribe, and comment so we can keep going.